Hi, love. Today we're revisiting anger because our previous chats about anger have been some of your favorite. And from my own journey with anger, I know that it's one of the trickiest emotions to let go of. And so, one conversation about it is typically not enough. So, we're going to revisit it a bit today and kind of go through this step-by-step understanding of what you're experiencing and what your choices are about how to move through it, and not hang out there too long. You know, there are a lot of health consequences for holding on to anger, and one of them is certainly heart disease. There are a lot of diseases associated with chronic anger. But certainly heart disease is one of them. And they're usually the big scary ones, the big scary diseases, right, that are driven by some of our more toxic, persistent emotions. So just know that there's a big, big payoff in terms of your overall wellness and longevity and healthcare and not just longevity, but like how you age. I often talk about that a lot of the reasons I run my life and my lifestyle the way I do is because when I'm 70, I want to be like with it and like feel easy to adventure and don't want to feel like trapped by choices that I made in my past. I am often thinking of my future self when I'm making lifestyle choices and doing this healing work, because I think also when you're coming through a divorce, it's like, oh shit, I don't want to say waste, right? Because nothing is a waste. My life is always happening. This is my life. I always want to learn from and integrate and celebrate all the aspects of my lived existence. But I think there is often, as part of the grief process or the healing process, this feeling like I wasted so many years, and I want to really make the most out of the rest of the years. And so when we have conversations like this about chronic emotional patterns, it's really because we want to set ourselves up to have beautiful, abundant futures where we get to make the most of it and not feel regret for for some of the choices we made in the past. So, all right, let's dig into anger. So, y'all know I've been chatting about the emotional guidance scale from Law of Attraction, from the book, actually, Ask and It Is Given by Jerry and Esther Hicks. Esther Hicks uses this in the Law of Attraction seminars that she gives. She'll give out these emotional guidance scales. I'll definitely stick it in the show notes for you to take a look at it. But on the emotional guidance scale, there are a couple of brands of anger, and it's really important for us to look at these different brands of anger to really get into the nuances of how to identify what we're feeling and then how to move on from it. So lowest on the emotional guidance scale that is like anger adjacent is jealousy. It's a very low vibe emotion, jealousy. And then just up from that is hatred or rage. And then just up from that is revenge. Then just up from that is plain old fashioned anger. And then we skip through discouragement, which is like maybe anger light, like super anger light, or like anger adjacent. And then 15 is blame. So for the purpose of this conversation today about anger, I need you to really set the intention of teasing out blame from good old-fashioned anger. And I think that in all the lower vibe brands of anger, revenge, hatred, rage, and jealousy, they all have a component of blame woven into them. And so it's not just straight up and down anger. Anger is such a valuable emotion. It helps us understand when some action needs to be taken. It's powerful. It motivates us. It helps us know when movement is called for, right? Like where maybe we're being treated very poorly, or where there's not a healthy boundary in place, or where we've given up on ourselves in certain ways. We'll feel anger, and it feels like an action, and it feels like, okay, I can do something about this thing that I don't like, right? So it has its value. It's certainly higher on the emotional scale than despair and hopelessness and all that. The last podcast conversation we had about anger was me recommending that you embrace it. Embrace your anger in order to release it. And that is, I stand by that. It's super, super valuable, because so often the reason emotion becomes chronic, something that we can't get free of, we can't figure out how to let go of, is because we haven't allowed ourselves the fullest expression of the emotion. Because it's in that full expression that the mind body is like, oh, okay, I feel validated. Even self with self, right? Think about it. So often with ourselves, we're not willing to fully experience and validate our own emotional experience. We case build, right? We call our best girlfriend, we call our mom, we call the lawyer, we call whoever, we tell our kids what a dick so-and-so was so that we feel validated by someone else. But that is not a full expression and full validation. That is not, we often talk about how good it feels to feel truly seen, validated, and heard by someone else. And that's true, right? But often it's because we are not willing to go to the depths of what we see, think, feel, hear, know, and believe. Get to know that, validate it, feel it, express it, like be it, embody it, right? Because it's so deep, dark, and scary. So many times I've had clients say, I'm afraid if I fully go there, I'll never come out. I'll get stuck there. And actually the opposite is true, loves. When we avoid, when we suppress, when we bypass, that's when we get stuck. So interesting. We're afraid of those places. But what I see people doing in society, and certainly in my practice, is that we go to these deep places of anger, but we take blame with us. And when we take blame with us, blame blocks letting go, and blame blocks us integrating the lessons we're learning from walking these paths. And so really being able to pinpoint where blame is contaminating your healing journey, because that is where it's interrupting your progress, right? Emotions are meant to be like an ocean tide. They're meant to come in and to go out. They're meant to be signals to help us understand what we like and what we don't like. They're meant to be signals that help us really enrich our lived experience. So when the tide comes in and it doesn't go out, something got in the way, right? Something major got in the way. And what I really want you to hear today is, more often than not, what got in the way is blame. Now, if you listen to the noodle session that producer Joy and I did on this topic, preparing for this episode, we go really deep into how to decontaminate blame from our feelings process. So deep, we get into the dialogue about whether or not your path, your kid's path, your parents' path, the most heinous story you've ever heard, whether those paths were predestined, or whether, and the butterfly effect to do with that, or whether or not it could have gone another way. Because the idea that it could have gone another way is basically blame. It's blaming ourselves for our mistakes. It's blaming our forefathers for their mistakes. And in my experience, love, anywhere blame is activated, we cannot fully heal. And so why does it matter, right? Why does it matter? Well, in my experience, all of that anger that I was trying to get free from all my years, right? There was so much of it that even though I actively tried to tip up on the emotional scale, even though I actively tried to take full responsibility for being on this timeline and this life experience, and trusting that God had a plan and a path for me, and that everything I was going through was meant for my sanctification, right? Kind of tying all the concepts we've been talking about on the pod together lately. Like, even though I knew that intellectually, I couldn't quite get it to shift or to release on this like deep, deep, deep level. And so what was happening for me is I still had chronic disease, and I still had a lot of noise in my mind, even though it would get less and less and less noise with each healing modality I used, right? And so I think it's important to understand that who we are is dictated so much by our genetics, our inherited traumas, our soul, our unique soul that came into this body, right? And how we experience life is determined by a lot of the lived experiences that have contaminated our who-ness, right? And so a lot of times people come to this deep, deep work and they're like, well, who am I going to be after EMDR? Who am I going to be after homeopathy? It's scary. I don't know if I'm going to recognize that person. Like, oh gosh, you're going to recognize her. Like, yes, there are going to be some adjustment periods, but who you are has been constant. Who you are, I believe, was preordained, right? And how you are is the part that you have control over, the part that you can redeem from what you have lived. And what I think is so cool is that we can even redeem the generational stuff, right? And I have a client who I'm working with right now who has a deeply, deeply painful story, so much generational sexual trauma and oppression. And she has said repeatedly to me, I wanted to break the cycle. I wanted to break the cycle. And at first I kept saying to her, love, you are breaking the cycle. And she kept saying no with my mom, right? It's like, no, I wanted to break the cycle for my mom also. I wanted to do it with her. I wanted our relationship to be healed and redeemed. And it's like, oh, by acknowledging that that is not an available choice for an individual to make, you can't choose for somebody else. That is where I see a lot of people get hung up. It's where I see people getting hung up in divorce recovery, because so many people say, but I wanted our marriage to be redeemed. I wanted my relationship with him to be redeemed. I wanted to do all the work so that I didn't have to start over and recover from this. I wanted him to do the work. And accepting that wasn't meant to be for some reason is very hard for people. Very, very hard. And so being able to really go into the depths of yourself and noodle through what you believe about God, your journey, your relationships, your purpose, who you were meant to be, and how you are being today. That's why so often we talk about so much of the healing process is about knowing yourself on a really deep level. Because oftentimes, if we don't get to the root of the thing, it is always going to spring back. It's always going to grow back. And so these deep, deep conversations, they're intimidating and they're confusing, and I love them. But I know that not everybody does, and that's okay. So we can have like the conversation light that's like, hey, if you notice you have some chronic anger, you've got a handful of choices. You can do your best to feel into it so that it just releases, it unhooks. You can do your best to tease blame out of it. You can do your best to tip up from it, like make the best of it, right? Tipping up is just like saying, like, make the best of this situation. Find some things about this situation that I like, right? I have asked that question of a lot of people. What are the things you like about this new post-divorce life, right? Like not sleeping next to someone who snores, or being able to control the remote, or like being able to have whatever you want for dinner, right? There's certainly things about it that you don't like, but there are things about it that you do like. And those things certainly help you tip up from anger when you focus on the things that you do like about this current set of circumstances, right? So if you've used all those tools and you still feel haunted by jealousy, rage, revenge, anger, blame, like, well, let's use a different tool, you know? I mentioned to producer Joy that like I never used a tool like going to a week-long meditation retreat where I take a vow of silence and probably fasted quite a bit, right? Would that have worked for me? I don't know, because I didn't take that path. And I think that a lot of times we don't give ourselves enough time and space to fully collapse, to really follow our nervous systems, to really follow our emotional paths. And it's because we have too much responsibility, not enough community, right? We are overburdened with responsibility, modern living, right? And then we feel like things that aren't really responsibilities, we turn them into responsibilities, right? Like having to free myself from wrinkles rather than free myself from rage. Like, you know how much energy I've put into freeing myself from wrinkles? Like as much as I've put into freeing myself from rage? Maybe, you know? But so we get like kind of focused on the wrong stuff, you know, and then this stuff perpetuates. But if we don't uproot anger, what happens? Arthritis, heart disease, cancer, right? And I'm not predicting that you're going to have these particular diseases, but I'm here to tell you that there is a link in the scientific literature. There is an undeniable link between chronic, toxic emotions, and an emotion isn't toxic just because you experience it, right? Anger itself isn't toxic. It's when it becomes chronic love that it becomes toxic, right? So chronic toxic emotion absolutely negatively impacts our mental health and our physical health. And so it's just kind of like, well, how free do you want to feel? Because we often just get in our own way, right? We just get in our own way because it's hard to say, I don't have all the answers. And it's hard to say, I need help. And we feel like help should be automatically provided for us. I see this a lot in life. Like, people talk about the government should figure out a way to have healthcare be free or accessible to everyone, and that the government should figure out how, well, when's the last time the government actually, I'm not railing on the government here, but like, let's just be honest about like, what are we saying when we say that the government should solve our problems for us? Like, isn't that blame? Right? So it's like, well, I could say that somebody else should be responsible for my healing, or I could just get busy figuring out how to heal, and maybe being willing to take the same amount of action that I would take to have my iPhone and my Botox, and like be willing to apply that same level of urgency or desire to my own healing process. And I think that is tricky, right? And I think that pisses you off when I say it, because it would piss me off if someone said it to me, but it's true, right? Is that anywhere blame is activated, anywhere we feel like somebody else should be accountable for our journey or our healing path, we are not integrating the lessons. We're not fully taking our power back. We are diluting our power by saying somebody else should be providing the power to me. And so I just want you to ask yourself, how free do you want to be? And how accountable are you willing to be for that freedom? And I don't think it has to be all that hard and take all that long. In fact, if your healing takes so long, it's probably because you're avoiding asking for help more often, or like afraid that you can't afford the help, or afraid that you can't, afraid of who you're going to be if you get the help, or right? Like, you're afraid of something. So again, getting in our own way, right? Why has this healing journey taken me all these years? Well, some of it I think has been a lot of fear. Some of it I think has been a lot of ego for me. Like, maybe I thought that I knew more than I knew in the early years. Maybe I was really invested in blame. Maybe I had a bigger pile of shit to heal from. I don't know, right? But I know that we have such a wealth of information available to us today. And it's just like, sometimes are we ready to hear it? And I think that's what makes it take a long time, is sometimes we're just not ready to hear it yet. And healing is a process, and it does happen in layers. I will tell you today, loves, I am still getting in my own way, but I'm not so hard on myself for it. Like, let me give you a hard example. So Kaylee is my homeopath. Maybe you heard the episode on homeopathy. Kaylee is my homeopath, and she prescribes remedies for me. And guess what? I take my will back and I prescribe my own remedies for myself. And I totally derail my own case. And that's a conscious choice I make. So I say, oh, look at me being impatient, but also, oh, look at me wanting to learn by doing. And that's beautiful. So it's just like being willing to be honest with myself and recognize where there's a trade-off for what I'm doing, right? A trade-off by saying, okay, I'm going to learn by hijacking my own case, and then I'm going to accept the consequences of that, which is maybe it takes me longer to heal because I wanted to do it my way, right? That is what I see people do over and over and over again. And that's what happens with anger. It's like, well, I want to feel justified in my anger, because anger to me feels better than not even like shame, because I don't want you to trade your anger for like, oh, I made mistakes and I need to own those and go to shame. No, it's like, hang on, this next thing I'm about to say is like fire as all get out. We don't know how to trade anger for letting ourselves off the hook. We don't know how to trade anger for letting other people off the hook. We don't know how to trade anger for celebrating that my path is fine. We don't know how to trade anger for acceptance. We don't know how to trade anger for self-love. So what we do is like, we give ourselves these other options. Oh, it's like anger or shame, or anger or blame, or anger or, right? No, why not let anger go for like, oh, who I am was probably preordained, and therefore very purposeful by some power greater than myself. And that must be super magical. And so maybe I should just let myself off the hook, because I'm here doing this messy human shit where I'm learning by doing, and that's just how it's designed. I'm supposed to learn by doing. I'm also supposed to learn by saying I need help. And as long as I'm doing that, I'm doing great, right? And that I don't have to choose between anger and shame, or anger and fear, or anger and blame. I can choose between anger and like feeling like I'm a badass full of a lot of personal power given to me by a power greater than myself. I was designed to be a conduit for God's power. And that is what I'm having trouble accepting, is that I'm a conduit for God's power. And I could do a lot of good with that if I could let go of this anger. So that's the invitation this week is, right? Look at the places that you're doing blame. Look at the places where you're not allowing yourself to fully feel and express your anger. Look at the places where maybe you need to ask for a little more help. And look at the places where you're blocking yourself from feeling really freaking good about yourself, because that's what God wants for you and that's what the design was. And you're just not sure it's safe to do that because people are going to call you arrogant or something, right? And so you don't want to be judged for being arrogant or thinking highly of yourself. But at the end of the day, loves, we were supposed to come here to create and play and love well. To love and be loved. We are here to love and be loved. And you can't love and be loved well if you're blaming yourself or other people. And so exchange your anger for love. And if you can't figure out how to do that, DM me. And there's a path. There's a path. You are so worthy of love and belonging. You are so worthy of being celebrated. So is your ex. So is your mother-in-law. So are your parents. So are your children. Everybody gets a break. Everybody gets a break, because that is truly the path to a joyful existence. I love you so much. Peace. Dear Divorce Diary is a podcast by My Coach Dawn. You can find more at mycoachdawn.com.